Felly, wrth i bobl ymuno, as people are arriving, let me just do the introductions. My name is Iestyn Davies, and I'm Chief Executive Officer of Colegau Cymru, Colleges Wales, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. It's a real pleasure to welcome three people who are current or previous learners in the FE sector, to welcome Rob Bainham, our Project Manager for Active Wellbeing, Competitive Sport, and all things sporting and well-being in Colegau Cymru. And it's a real particular pleasure to welcome Dawn Bowden, the Deputy Minister for Sport, Wellbeing, Culture. Dawn will tell us a bit more about her role and portfolio a little bit later on, when we have an opportunity to discuss the Welsh Government's priorities in this area. Felly gair o groeso chi gyd, a hefyd chydig o ganllaw, some guidance this morning for the conduct of this webinar. The presentations will be made in the language of choice of the individual presenter. Mae'r slides, the slides are available. Mae'r slides ar gael ar ein safle we. Mae'r adroddiad ar gael ar ein safle we, a hefyd mae yna rhyw bwts o summary hefyd ar gael ar y safle, a mae'r links i hynny wedi cael ei roi mewn i'r chat ar hyn o bryd. The presentations, they say, excuse me, will be made in the language of choice of the presenters. The resources are available bilingually online, and there's a welcome for you to contribute in the chat function questions in the language of your choice, preferably English or Welsh or some other language that one of us speaks around the table. But there's a welcome for you to use either Welsh or English. Mae'n croeso chi ddefnyddio Gymraeg neu Saesneg mor yma. Felly, I'm hoping everybody can hear, everybody can contribute to the chat. I'm just going to check in our virtual room that we're all good to go, because I notice the Minister has connected and is reconnecting. So before we go much further, Dawn, I'm just going to ask you, can you hear us?
I can, yes. I just, for some reason, my connection just went and I dropped out, but I was, I think I was just putting a question in the chat and something happened. Sorry.
Well, welcome, croeso. Before we go any further today, this webinar, of course, is about learner well-being and how we safeguard and support our learners in the FE sector. It would be appropriate this morning, I feel, just to acknowledge the fact that today is the 55th anniversary of the Aberfan disaster. We are thinking about well-being, we're thinking about safeguarding our young people, and on a day such as this, it is a reminder that our physical facilities, our programs, and all that we do must have the well-being and safety of our learners at heart every day, but particularly to bear that in mind today on such an anniversary as this. So welcome to you all, croeso chi gyd. Rob, I'm going to hand over to you now, and then we can have a chat with some of our star learners, with Serin, Emily, and Fionn, who on screen for some reason says she's near Broderick. So she's not near Broderick, she's Fionn, France. So we'll be speaking to them a little bit later. Don't get too confused, but right now it's over to Rob Bainham.
Thanks, Iestyn, Jock, and thanks everybody this morning for joining the webinar. And thanks to the Deputy Minister and the learners for giving up your time this morning to join what hopefully will be an interesting webinar and give you some insight into what we're doing with active wellbeing. Lucy, if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to just put the slides up, please? For those of you who know me, there's quite a few on the call. I've had to hand over the technical IT duties here, so hopefully it'll run a little smoother. What we're going to do, if you could... Can you see? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can see. If somebody can pop in the chat to make sure they can all see, that would be good also. So the webinar this morning, the title for the sort of session and the presentation is Making the Connection, and the bit underneath is a little bit misleading in that we've titled it Active Wellbeing and Sport in Further Education, when actually sport we see in the future as a big part of active wellbeing as a strategy. Active wellbeing was introduced really in February 2020, which was great timing. We saw the pandemic come in and decided to launch our strategy probably 2 weeks before. But all jokes aside, the project that I work on primarily was started in 2014. There was a big focus at the time, and still is, on getting more young women and girls more active in further education. And I think that was the sort of primer for starting the project. And over sort of 6 or 7 years of delivery in colleges, where we were trying to get people more active, but also running competitive sport and coaching and volunteering alongside this, we felt the need as Colegau Cymru to come up with a strategy or come up with a way of embracing this under one umbrella. And that's probably where active wellbeing is. And it's very much about making the connection between activity and well-being, be it someone who's less active or someone's an elite performer. And we've got some of the elite guys on today to talk a little bit about their experiences, and whether someone's a volunteer ambassador. And again, we've got some of the young people on today to talk about that, or someone who's completely disengaged with activity. And we hope that active well-being covers all of those. I'm also going to discuss some research or present some findings on that, but obviously with research, I didn't want to do a 22-slide PowerPoint just about research findings. So we're going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the sector, what happened last year with the pandemic, and how the research leads into that and potentially gives us something to work on in the future. So Lucy, could you do the next slide, please? What I've done is taken basically a quote out of our strategy. This is one of the strategy document pages at the start, and I think it highlights why we felt we needed to do the research. You know, the comment there is very true, that being active is not only great for your physical health and fitness, but it could also be good for your mental well-being. But the bit we think that's misleading in there is that there's a lot of evidence linked to the first part of that, that if you're active, that it's good for your physical health. But we couldn't really find, when we started looking at this bit of work, clear qualitative evidence that showed that being more active or taking part in sport was good for your mental well-being. And we felt that if there was stuff there, it very much focused on one aspect of well-being, which was probably around happiness and around, you know, the immediate response. So did you enjoy an activity? Would you do it again? That type of stuff, and not the deeper sort of stuff that perhaps would lead to more sustainable approaches. So if you could go to the next slide, Lucy, that would be great. This is a really quick overview of active well-being as a strategy. We've got a full strategic document, which has obviously got goals, outcomes. It's got a lot of detail in there for colleges. We can share that another time. It's also available on the website. Basically, we feel that colleges, you know, are good hubs for getting people more active, for be it sport or low-level activity, that we can have an opportunity here to, you know, to change lives and also contribute to a bigger picture in Wales of getting more people active. I think the purpose of the strategy is quite good in that it doesn't just attack one part of well-being. We're very much looking at this work covering the emotional, the social and the physical well-being of college communities. And very quickly below that, there's some examples there in the mission of the sort of breadth of the strategy. So it's not just learners, it's for staff and students. It's very inclusive. It promotes diversity, tolerance and fairness. And also a big highlight for me is that when we came up with active well-being as a strategy, we couldn't really work out initially where sport fitted in. And the honest answer is it doesn't fit in. It's a big part of it. So it's something that's right through the strategy. But in this context, we are looking at how can we support learners to do the best, basically to thrive when they come to college as a sports person, whether they're just starting out, whether they're a volunteer or whether they're an elite athlete already when they come into college. I'll just give a little bit of insight into the photograph on here, and I think it gives a good flavour of what colleges do. This is a picture from Coleg Gwent in Cross Keys. As you can see, they've got a nice sports hall there. They've got cricket nets, but what they've done with the cricket nets is they've sort of repurposed the use at different times during the week. So the learner there is an ILS learner, someone with learning difficulties, is supported in the college, comes in as part of a group of those learners, and the activity has been provided by Newport local authority. So they've come in to run some archery sessions with those learners. So I think it gives a flavour of how we can combine the sporting bit of it, the less active bit of it, perhaps work with some groups that don't normally get an opportunity, and also use facilities that might not obviously be used year round, as in cricket nets, for their sporting purpose. Go next slide, please. This slide is sort of a nod towards what we're doing at the moment. So I've taken a little bit of I've cheated a little bit here. I've taken some of the research findings and sort of put a little bit in there, but we've got 5 strategic outcomes we want active well-being to achieve. Growth is, as a strategic outcome, is basically to get it up the pecking order, to get more people aware of the benefit of activity and well-being and the connection. At the moment, what we see is that it's becoming increasingly embedded in FE programs, and it's linked to programs such as mental health and well-being, and that applies to sport and other areas as well. Our second strategic outcome is entitlement, and that's an entitlement to activity. And what we see at the moment is the colleges are beginning to create programs where this activity is bespoke for the learners. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and staff. longer term, what we'd like it to be seen as is something that's viewed as a normal part of the college day. So this entitlement to activity or sport is something that the college learners and staff don't see as extracurricular, don't see as something that's an additionality. They see it as something that's an entitlement, and they get it just as part of the normal curriculum or the normal working day. Thirdly, this one's quite interesting in that it relates to the young ambassadors we've got on the call, is that what we're also trying to do now is to look at how can we increase the resilience of the future workforce. But what's important there is to look at how we can develop activities and ways of evaluating that increase the understanding of the connection. And I think ambassadors already have that. They know that by volunteering, working, coaching, engaging with young people and their peers, they get a benefit from that, be it employability, be it confidence and so on. What we don't see at the moment is that sort of translating through to other activity and sport in terms of learners getting that benefit and that increased resilience from it. Fourth point is basically the sport point, and with a nod to the research we'll talk about in a minute. What we'd like to continue to do as Colegau Cymru is showcase that there's great professional training environments for learners in FE. We need to develop new coach education partnerships. There's a big job of work to be done with that. But basically, any learner coming in engaged in sport should be able to thrive. So linking into the Sport Wales strategy, we really want learners to come in and have the opportunity to sport in college. And finally, the bit on there about celebrating is we see the winning rugby teams of colleges, you know, being celebrated. We see a lot of activity being celebrated, but perhaps when a college gets 600 learners from an area that potentially they weren't active before active, is that celebrated in the same way? So we now want colleges and ourselves to be better at doing that. Okay, for the next slide. And this slide is really a flavour of what happened last year. So before we get into the research, I think this will tell you a little bit about what it was like in FE. And a lot of the information on this slide comes from project feedback. So colleges were still delivering last year. Colleges were still trying to run activities online. They were trying to provide opportunities for ambassadors to develop social media skills. There was lots of stuff going on. And also there was uncertainty. So this slide, as you look at it from left to right, September obviously was where we saw the start of the academic year through to the end in June. And what we saw there was a lot of new staff involved in active wellbeing being employed at the start of the academic year. There was a lot of a move towards social media, online platforms. Colleges did go back face-to-face in the autumn term, but it was in a very different controlled environment. And what we saw there was we saw the engagement levels went up. So where you see the sort of red curve going up in November, there was quite a lot of stuff going on. And also there was quite a lot of stuff going on with groups that were in college more often. So for example, ILS and ESOL, which is English spoken as another language courses, that they were in college potentially more than some of the mainstream students, the guys that were doing your regular A-levels, BTECs and so on, just because of safeguarding or communication reasons. And we saw a lot of activity taking place and a lot of engagement there. But moving into the winter where you see the dip there, a lot of this sort of stopped. Perhaps people had a little bit of Zoom fatigue, which is common across the sector, where there was challenges around perhaps accessing different types of opportunity. And so what colleges did then, we started to look at, okay, can we do some work online? Can we collaborate? Can we do other work around comms? So we developed communication guides with the college's help. We had feedback from them that learners, as you look into February and March, were starting to experience difficulties. You know, some were discussing nutrition problems, some were discussing sleep. Others were mentioning that further on colleges then looked at mental health interventions. And we started to refocus really. And I guess what was interesting there was colleges looked at what was happening and they adapted and they re-engaged and they came up with ideas such as tutorial energizers, as wellbeing online festivals, things that learners could access that weren't more, and forgive me for saying this, more Joe Wicks or more Strava challenges, which were working back in October and November, but were sort of becoming the virtual PE cross-country in a muddy day that people didn't want to do. That was where they probably ended up after Christmas. As Colegau Cymru, what we did then is we obviously supported college with some of these things around comm, CPD activity, but there was two bits of work I think that were important there. We launched FEYA, which is Further Education Young Ambassadors, and we also engaged Blue Bow in two pieces of research, and that's probably where we're going to head to in a moment. One point I think that's important there is that when you see the curve go up in April, there was a lot of expectancy that things would open up in the summer term. And because colleges had to do early assessments, there was pretty much no opportunity to do additional activity in the summer term. So that gave us this opportunity online to do some more research and work around it. That's a flavour of last year. Lucy, if you could go to the next slide, please. And pretty much we did 2 pieces of research, and this is, you know, some of the focus of why everybody's here today. The first piece of research was what was the impact of COVID on sports learners and those who would volunteer and coach in FE, and the recovery from COVID-19. In this sample, we had 12 college focus groups. That's all the colleges with competitive sport. It involved 93 sports or academy learners, plus their tutors supporting the sessions, and they were all delivered online. All of these sessions were delivered remotely using an external research team contacting the learners whether they were in college or whether they were at home. I think the findings offer a bit of a wider picture than expected. When we started this, we felt learners might miss competing, which they did, absolutely. They might miss meeting their friends. There were certain parts of, you know, trips and different things that they would normally get in competitive sport that we felt they'd miss, but actually the picture was much wider. And what I'll do is I'll go through 5 or 6 of the key findings. There's a lot more detail in the report, and there's also some other aspects of the report that say that there's more work to be done by colleges, which is true. But this is some areas I think that we can see clear findings and impact. So loss of structure was quite interesting. That basically meant that they liked the idea of being in an academy, coming in early in the morning, training, having the holistic support of the colleges. And pretty much, and we'll hear this maybe from some of the learners after, that was completely different. They were at home, online, training at home, not able to meet their peers. And the knock-on impact of that is, and we're seeing this, is that had an impact on the emotional well-being of these learners. We sometimes think of sports learners as being ultra resilient and tough and competitive, but they've also got a lot of pressure. So if they weren't able to take part in their normal activity or to be the best at what they do or to compete, what's the impact of that? Access to training and facilities, there was reported by the learners that they weren't, you know, obviously able to take part and compete and play, but some of them, for whatever reason, didn't have, you know, access to get to somewhere to train. And that could have been sport specific, so particularly for sports like netball, for some of the martial arts, boxing, swimming, there was clear feedback that pretty much stopped. And what does that do? You know, that gives them almost the loss of identity. So these young people have got a lot going on, 16, 17, 18, and at that stage in their life, if you take away the one thing that perhaps is their release or it's their highlight of their week or the thing that they're really good at, you know, if it's just the training element or it's going to the boxing gym and really doing their activity, that loss of identity is a big potential impact. And that's something where we've seen examples of learners going to do other stuff instead of sport. Inclusivity and access, that was basically, it sort of touches a little bit with return to sport. Where there were sports like rugby and football, where perhaps they're linked to semi-pro or professional environments, what we saw with that is that there's probably more opportunity there. There was more opportunity for male learners to return before female. That's sometimes down to numbers, it's sometimes down to having a professional club associated with it. There was a big impact because netball was obviously an indoor sport, was quite late to return. And it sort of highlighted a problem that, you know, perhaps the boys were able to return to sport a little bit earlier than the girls in FE. And what we're seeing there now is perhaps a knock-on effect. And I guess this would be similar with different age groups just before and after, you know, schools and unis. We're seeing that potentially less young women and girls are enrolling on sports courses or playing competitive sport this year. The access to experience and opportunities employment for me is probably the biggest part of all of this research that came out. And what learners said was if they weren't aware of NGB opportunities, we sort of ground that down a bit, and it probably results from them not having the practical experience. And normally in Wales, there's probably 2,000 to 3,000 FE learners who go out and volunteer and coach as part of their college course. They would have contact with primary schools, they would meet people, they would do activity in the local community. And basically that would then mean that they have that contact with the NGB or local authority. The knock-on effect of that's pretty clear. They've missed that for 2 years. That could be a workforce volunteer shortage. And then the last bit really, return to sport. You know, it took a long time for FE sport to get back up and running. It is now. And learners were nervous about returning to sport. So some obviously were desperate to get back, but there was still a nervousness around it. What would it look like? Would they have the same opportunities? And so as a sort of final bit of that, you know, from the sports research, what we've perhaps seen is that the visibility of this sport over the last 2 years to people who want to come up, the 13, 14, 15-year-olds, wasn't there. And that could be also looked at in terms of FE into university. But certainly we perhaps have got a challenge where are the 13, 14, 15-year-olds next lot coming through now not so familiar with what's available at 16 plus. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this slide is in relation to the active well-being. So we also did a study that was focused on less active learners. The middle sort of bench on this, which is part of the seesaw, as you look at it, that explains the range of learners we work with. We've got some nice quotes in there. So some of the feedback that come out was really inspiring or really sort of motivating stuff. And I won't go through all of those now, but it really told us about how much the learners in the colleges valued having some activity, even if it was online. So perhaps what we found through all of it is that their understanding of the benefit of doing some activity on their well-being wasn't strong. They knew what teamwork was. They knew what meeting together and being social with each other was good. But did they understand that had a longer term benefit? So what I've done is I've put on here, basically on the left, some of the findings are that we need to raise the value of active well-being. So it needs to be more prominent. You know, it needs to be something that's important, being active and improving your well-being. We need to continue to tackle inclusion and diversity because there's still clearly challenges for some learners, be it from ethnically diverse communities, those with lower income and so on. There still was fed back that there's a challenge for some people to do activity. We also need to improve the understanding of incidental or perhaps informal learning. So there's benefits to doing a yoga class that you don't see. There's benefits to going for a run that are wider than just doing that bit of physical activity. And it's how do you embed that in there? If we get those things right, the areas on the right-hand side of the seesaw, as we look at it, potentially will be the well-being benefits. So I'll go from the bottom up. So eudaimonic well-being is basically long-term well-being. It's your understanding of yourself, your understanding of what the benefits are. We can include that in activity. We can sort of put underlying themes in there and develop that. Without any shadow of a doubt, the most important one probably is the mental health benefit. So preventing mental health rather than just continually trying to cure it could come about because of getting people more active. And that was something learners understand that, but how can we do it more to improve well-being? And then the last one, recognising diversity of learning need. That pretty much is not about the diversity of different groups. That's about each person from the research was given us very different reasons in terms of why they can take part in activity, when they can do it. And colleges are now looking at offering bespoke activities. So they've done it already, but offering different options for different groups, working with specific groups to sort of get around the diversity of learning need. And that could be based on time. So some, for example, we spoke to mature teaching assistants, that they had very little time due to family commitments in other areas. We spoke to some of the guys in health and social care. They've got really, really busy timetables. They've got placements, you know, so their needs are very different, say, to ILS learners or ESOL learners or those on performing arts courses. So it's about diversifying the offer, but also recognising the difference in learning. Finally, on this slide, is we've tried to now look at this as something for the future that we can use as a new way of evaluating well-being. So part of the work was getting some feedback from the learners, but also the second bit of it was seeing if it worked. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we're heading with that next. Okay, so next slide, Lucy, please, if you can. And I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. On the left, the sort of different types of evidence that we've found through the research and through the feedback from colleges. There's 5 areas there, and I'm going to just really quickly highlight a couple of things as we go through these. And obviously the slides are available after, and I'm happy to answer any questions or feedback from people later. Bespoke delivery really means what I've just said, and that's going to be looked at further. If you look on the right, the top box there is the Welsh Government Mental Health Research. And what that is in a nutshell is we're doing another stage of active wellbeing research with a bigger sample. It's being refined. It starts now after half term. It will be qualitative, it'll be focus groups, and hopefully we're going to come up with a new way that we can evaluate wellbeing in this way, evaluate active wellbeing in particular, but also then look at peer-led ways of doing it. So potentially use ambassadors and other people that are other peers, other students to work with their own groups. If you've got next slide, please, Lucy. So all of these areas of work that we're looking at on the right basically tie into it, getting better at evaluating that connection. I've mentioned in the second box down, we have a project we run with Sport Wales, which every year probably hits around 4,000 to 5,000 learners. Most of those are less active and disengaged with sport. We need to get better at evaluating that activity, but we think there's options then to use that in the wider sector also. If you could go to the next slide. This is one of the most important ones for me. So as we mentioned in the sports research, learners missed out on volunteering, being ambassadors, coaching, lost their connection with the NGBs. And at the bottom on the right-hand side, our sort of NGB engagement work now with Colleges Wales Sport, that CWS, is going to grow through some funding that Welsh Government have set aside for what's now been called the Winter of Wellbeing. It was Summer of Fun. And we've got a project lined up with some good funding, which will enable us to upskill, hopefully, 500 plus FE learners to re-engage in contact with NGBs, re-engage with coach ed, and get their leadership skills back up and running. So we've got a next slide, please. This really is longer term, so getting better understanding of eudaimonic well-being. Do people understand by taking part, or learners understand by taking part in activity that are bigger sort of benefits than just being active? Although just going and doing a session, enjoy it, is important. How can we embed that with people who are potentially the next coaches, next teachers? They're going to be parents, hopefully not too soon, but perhaps, in the next few years. And so the type of things we're doing there, if you look, we've got outdoor activity challenges. So we're trying to create opportunities for them to go have experiences together as a group, see other groups from other colleges, and these are the less active learners. But we also then need the sports learners to help volunteer and support those activities as well. And we have learned through COVID that online CPD and training works. So in that respect, we can use some online stuff, but we still want face-to-face. Okay, and last slide, last one on there. And then colleges are already doing a lot of work in terms of diversity inclusion. And I'll very quickly mention that some of the college campuses are actually communities in their own rights when you look at the number of learners from different backgrounds that come there, be it from people from socially deprived areas or lower economic areas, be it people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, or those young people with learning difficulties. And if I use the sort of three of the biggest cities as example, there's 500 plus learners on English as a second language courses in Newport, in Cardiff, and in Swansea. And we've done some initial work with those. And as an example, we're working a little bit initially with the FAW Trust. They've got a project called Refugee Football, and that will allow potentially colleges to offer opportunities to those learners alongside normal activity. Okay, and just one more slide, and I won't go through all of these on the last. Sorry, next one after that, please, Lucy. A few points for discussion, and these are really feedback from the research. So how can we recognise the wider value? How can we create new evaluation tools measuring the connection? What's the impact of COVID been on future workforce for sport and wellbeing? How can we ensure that this return to sport is equal? That's been a challenge, and that we don't lose out on the next generation of guys like the three young ladies who are on the call with us today, the ambassadors and sports people. And finally, it's how can delivery change to improve the understanding and long-term benefit? And hopefully that's given you a flavour of where we're heading as Colegau Cymru. There's a combination of the research, the strategy, and some other work that we're doing. So thanks very much.
Well, great. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Rob. Thanks ever so much, Rob. Some really useful insights there, and also some reflections on what we're currently doing in Colegau Cymru, which really is only possible because of the support we get from Sport Wales, and of course, more importantly, from the colleges, the 13 colleges in membership, and also the young people as ambassadors and participants and the staff as well. And learner voice is really important to us in everything that we do and plan, and all the research that we undertake in Colegau Cymru. And it's a real pleasure to go and speak to some of our current and indeed most recent past learners who've been participants in our active wellbeing programme and our wider sport programme. And I'm going to go to Emily first. Now, Emily is a learner in Lles ColegauCymru in the second year of a programme. Emily, tell us a bit about your chosen sport first and what you do in order to be active and to look after your own well-being. What's your sport of choice?
Well, I take part in something called CrossFit, and then through CrossFit, I found Olympic weightlifting, which I've been doing coming up to 3 years now, I think. and I found it literally just one day scrolling through social media, and I stumbled across a female athlete that was doing something. I don't remember exactly what it was. It must have been like walking on her hands or something. And I was kind of like, whoa, what is that? It looks very cool. So I looked around and saw if there was anything like that around my area, and there was. And then I got myself involved and just landed where I am now.
Fantastic. CrossFit's really, really interesting, new and emerging sport. So have you been training today, or are you going to be training today?
Yeah, I'm training this evening, actually.
So what's the WOD likely to be today then?
I think I have some Olympic lifting first, some snatching, some squatting, and then some rope climbs before a little conditioning piece after all that.
Brilliant. And for those of you who don't know, under our active wellbeing and competitive sport program, particularly where we are trying to reach out into non-team sports and like not those sports that are so synonymous with FE like rugby and soccer, we've actually arranged, didn't we, a powerlifting, weightlifting competition. And Emily, how did that go for you?
I did win it. Yeah.
So congratulations on that win, and it's an example of the kinds of activities we're introducing into Colegau Cymru active wellbeing and competitive sport. So, Emily, what's it like being a student in Coleg ColegauCymru?
I enjoy it. I enjoy the freedom and sort of extra support that I think you get, more than if I were to say stay in school or whatever. Especially in the sport specific kind of route, because we have something called the Elite Performance Program, which is something that I'm involved in, and it's specific for the individual sports that aren't really the common netball, rugby, football, etc. And yeah, that's a really great place of support that you could go to.
Fantastic. So. Well, I'm going to go to Seren and Ffion in a moment. Seren, croeso i'r session. Welcome to this session. Tell us a bit about who you are, what you're doing, and more importantly, where you are now in terms of your sport and indeed your learning journey.
Yeah, so I'm in USW at the minute, University of South Wales, studying sports coaching and development. So I'm in my second year now. And then when I was in Neath College, I was fortunate enough to be a Gold Young Ambassador, which then when I joined university in my first year, I joined the National Young Ambassador Steering Group, which was a great opportunity and a great experience. And now I'm a Young Ambassador alumni.
And Ffion, how about you? What's your sport and learning journey been like these last few years?
So I attended Neath College for the first year, and I did A-levels, and I was doing my Gold to Edinburgh at the time, so I needed to find a volunteering section to do, and that's how I got linked to Lindsay Piper, and she got me to do the Friday sessions with the young ambassadors from the older age group at Llandarcy, and I would coach children with young children with disabilities, and maybe those who weren't quite as able as others to do sport. And then through that, then I just decided that I enjoyed like sport more than any of my other A-levels. So I transferred to Llandarcy for my second year. So I was there for 2 years again. And now I'm in Birmingham City University studying sports therapy.
Seren, sut mae wedi bod yn ystod cyfnod Covid? What's it been like during the Covid period? You're clearly very active, really wanting to be involved in your sport. What's been your personal experience of the impact of Covid on you?
Yeah, so obviously my first year at university was when Covid hit, so I had to do most of my lectures online, which obviously doing a sports coaching course is quite difficult. So then I've also been coaching cricket outside of university, so that also had a big impact because obviously cricket is a team sport and there was too much contact, so again COVID had a massive impact on that. But moving forward now, everything is getting back to normal. Hopefully I'm starting back placement with university, so hopefully COVID is slowly going away, so hopefully we can get back active in schools and just encourage more participation in sport, really.
And what is your number one sport, Seren?
Cricket is my number one sport.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Fionn, how about you? What's your go-to sport?
I've got a few. I don't have a specific one. I love running, and through the lockdown, I increased on that as well. So I did charity runs. So in July this year, I ran 125 miles for IPF, which is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is a disease that people don't really know about. They don't have any research to do with it either. So yeah, through the lockdown, that really helped me go with it.
Well, that's fantastic stories there, and great to see you overcoming all the barriers and problems that COVID has thrown up for so many people, and not least obviously those of you really keen on your sport. So Emily, where do you think things are going to go next for you once Coleg ColegauCymru is kind of, completed? What are the next steps?
Sport-wise, I'm just going to continue training the way that I am now, and wherever that takes me. I think I'm not going to put any pressure on myself to hit certain deadlines for anything. And then course or career-wise, next year I'm planning to take a gap year, just because I enjoy so much of the course that I'm doing now. I want to figure out a specific route to go down, so that I don't want to start up anything to just drop out after I figure out that isn't what I want to focus on. So at the moment, probably along the exercise physiology or physiotherapy kind of route.
Fionn, you talked about being in Birmingham as well during your sort of lockdown experience. Is that right, or did you start this September?
No, so I started this September. So I was actually in Llandarcy when the lockdown happened, and it was just after I had been chosen to go to Malta with the college. It was like I think 10 people. Me and Sarah were chosen, and obviously we couldn't go, so that really, I think, was an effect on us. But then through the COVID, then I had to be a young ambassador as well. So that was really tough because we had to think of different things, and obviously before we've seen what people have done in different situations. With that, it was a completely new situation. We had to come up with our new tactics ourselves, and Lindsay really helped us through that, but it was really difficult. And I think the thing is with me, I was just a swimmer before I went to Llandarcy, and then I got into football and rugby, which are two sports I never ever would have thought I would have wanted to get into. So I think I can imagine how many females have missed out on that opportunity to get into a sport that they didn't think they'd ever get into. They were I was able to see that sport and see all the girls doing it, but they obviously haven't been able to see that. So I think they've missed out on an opportunity as well.
So Fionn's referenced a number of things there which Colegau Cymru tries to pull together, Dawn. One, of course, is the trip to Malta, which was supposed to be an Erasmus Plus funded trip. Now we've still got the funding there for that. Of course, we've got the touring UK government funding to ensure we have some further continuation of exchange. And of course, we've got the really exciting international learning exchange program, which Welsh government has also launched, which is coming on stream pretty soon as well. So we try to blend these various programs together and to ensure that whether it's in Llandarcy, or whether it's in Malta, or whether it's in ColegauCymru or Coleg Cymru, or wherever it might be across our networks or further afield, that we bring these various programs together. But Sarah, just perhaps to close before we chat with Dawn about Welsh Government's priorities, if you were to recommend anything now to young people in your shoes, maybe in the first or second year of a course in an FE college, what would be the one bit of advice that you would give them to get the most out of their learning experience?
Yeah, I would say just get out there, get involved in as much as you can. If there's any opportunities that are available to you, just take them with both hands, because obviously we've missed out on so much through the lockdown. Just get as much as you can under your belt now, and then which will obviously help you in the future. So yeah, just take every opportunity that you get.
Fantastic. So diolch yn fawr iawn I Seren ac hefyd I Fionn, a diolch yn fawr iawn hefyd I Aled a'r tîm and Young Ambassadors. Thank you to Sarah and Fionn, and to the guys from Young Ambassadors. Now, I reckon we need to have a quiet word with Emily, because she did great this morning as a first timer for this kind of forum. I reckon you make a fantastic Young Ambassador yourself as well, Emily, okay? So look out for those opportunities. And I know Ali Davis from the Young Ambassadors program is going to be in touch now. I can see him writing his email already to reach out. So Dawn, you've seen and heard there some of the opportunities that Colegau Cymru has been trying to create, linking in particular to competitive sport. Some of the barriers that we all really knew perhaps that were there, and this research has helped sort of shine a light on. In that context, what is the Welsh Government's current priorities for active well-being and competitive sport?
Well, Iestyn, first of all, can I say it was great to hear Rob setting out the details of your research in this area, and to hear Sarah and Emily and Fionn, absolutely inspiring. So it always feels difficult to come in after listening to young people's inspiring kind of stories, and then you get a boring government minister coming in and rattling through government priorities and spending after that. But hopefully it will help inform the discussion that we're going to have afterwards. So initially, Iestyn, can I say thanks very much to Colegau Cymru for giving me the opportunity to come along and do this today, and really to talk about the Welsh Government's priorities for sport and participation in particular, because we've heard further education institutions, both from the staff and learners, having faced significant challenges this year as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, and some of those challenges are clearly going to continue. So we'll aim to support the sector to survive and recover, and we'll continue to work with you on that. But what I would say is, while we keep at the front of our minds all the negative impacts the pandemic's had on further education institution learners and staff, I think it is encouraging to hear that the positive experiences and lessons learned that have emerged during this time. There's no doubt that this is going to help us to guide our thinking as we move forward, and I'm certainly grateful for the researchers who've captured some of those important stories. And in recognising the importance of sport for the improvement of health and well-being, particularly as part of our recovery from the pandemic, I think it is vital that we maintain our investment in this area to look to enhance the level of capital investment wherever possible. Our spending plans for sport are going to enable the Welsh Government to continue to invest through its delivery partner Sport Wales, who've talked about that already, in the people and the places to provide inclusive and equal opportunities for people to lead healthy and active lives and to realise their sporting potential. Our actions and investments will focus on supporting sport to create a healthy and active population, and one which identifies and nurtures sporting talent. We're going to continue our programme of investing in sports facilities, and we've got an enhanced budget this year of £7 million to provide modern, accessible and attractive facilities to encourage people of all ages to engage in sport and to support our talented athletes in their pursuit of success. Our investment priorities are based on the evidence drawn from the National Survey for Wales, the School Sports Survey, and the research that Sport Wales commissioned from Savanta Comres on the impact of coronavirus on physical activity levels. Again, some of that which you've already touched on this morning. So Sport Wales' investment approach specifically targets the reach and impact that partners can have on different equality objectives. Its strategic intent is to give every young person a great start, giving them skills, confidence and motivation to enjoy and progress through sport. And its investment strategy puts emphasis on the results of the school sports survey that I referred to, ensuring that sports prioritise their work to enhance children's enjoyment of and passion for sport. And one of the key challenges that Sport Wales has implemented recently is a revised investment strategy, which now focuses on three key areas. So that's capability, accountability, and data-driven investment. And that approach has refocused the way in which Sport Wales invests public money and lottery funding in its partner network, both for national governing bodies of sport and other national and regional partners. And the criteria-based investment approach specifically targets the reach and impact that partners can have on different equality objectives. And while all sports will be funded based on their participation rates and demand for their sport, there's going to be specific recognition of a partner's ability to impact on different demographics. That really brings me to my final area around equality in sports. And listening to the lived experiences of underrepresented minorities is a key feature of Sport Wales' future work. Of the 1,200 plus club funding applications that Sport Wales received during the pandemic, 70% identified how their applications will promote equality. And that percentage increased to 79% of the applications received for the progress strand within the Be Active Fund. And examples included things like, facility hire for a football club in Rhyl that was focused on women and girls football, coach development for women and LGBTQ members in Rugby Heaven Limited. Exiles Together, Newport County undertook a consultation of women and girls of diverse ethnic backgrounds to identify the activities of most interest to them, and now looking to deliver those activities through the hire of a facility within the community. And there was essential works to a dedicated veterans pitch in Manylion AFC. So it was also good recently to see that the FAW signing the Muslim Athlete Pledge. That demonstrates their commitment to equality and diversity. They've stated that the pledge is a commitment to start recognising Muslim needs in football. So, that was just a very quick canter through our priorities in terms of participation and how we're funding that, and I hope it will help to inform some of the discussion today and how what we're doing in Welsh Government can contribute to the whole of the wellbeing agenda. And I'd be quite happy to talk a little bit more about some of the work that I'm doing with my colleague Lynn Legal, who's the Minister for Health and Wellbeing, and how what she does in her portfolio crosses over into my portfolio in sport, and how all of that crosses over into the education portfolio. There's an awful lot of joined up work around this whole agenda, and it'd be really interesting to hear what people have got to say about that, and any views and comments. And I'd be happy to tell you about my visit to the FAW yesterday to see the Wales women football team. Absolutely fantastic. If you want to see a great example of equality of access to a sport, look at what the FAW are doing with women's football. Absolutely fantastic model.
Brilliant. Diolch yn fawr, Dawn. Thanks ever so much. We even managed there to reference the Exiles, Newport AFC, without actually sort of, choking too much on it. As I know you're a massive Bristol City fan, but given that I was once a Martyrs fan myself, it's quite
there we are.
Be supporting the Exiles, I must admit. So soccer in particular, really important sport that is really, as we know, driving women's participation in competitive sport. Yesterday, some of us were at the Celtic Manor, and as you know, Dawn, from your work with your local college in Merthyr Tydfil,
the golf.
Yeah, we're exploring golf as well. Again, really trying to target women into that sport. So lots of opportunities out there from a range of sports, particularly, as you say, those which are not traditionally associated with some members of our underrepresented communities. But I know, Rob, you've been doing some work quite recently with the ESOL community and members of the ethics and more ethnically diverse community in Cardiff, using sport as well in a brand new facility the Welsh Government has helped locate right at the rear of Cardiff and Vale College, for instance. So, Rob, there's some great examples of this kind of work going on. What do you think really is the next challenge for us? Where do we need to be looking, and where can we be looking to work with Welsh Government in particular?
Thanks, Justin. I think that Dawn's comment, Deputy Minister's comment, was interesting, that they work in different departments working together, because sometimes that's something that perhaps a perception is that we are trying to work with different departments in isolation. So we've got some additional research funding from Welsh Government which will support the growth of the active wellbeing research. We've obviously then got some funding coming through now for the Winter of Wellbeing, which will support the coach education bit. I think, for me, looking at this from the outside, there's two areas. One is what happens to the 14 to 16-year-olds. Very often, like, the step change for us is people come into FE and they've already given up sport, or they've already perhaps fallen out of love with PE, and that's not a blame of the schools at all. That's perhaps just the offer doesn't fit sometimes. So there's that group, the future FE learners, who I think are a big target. And the second bit would probably be around, in general, active wellbeing terms, is how can we recognise the size of the communities or the scale of the community? So you mentioned the ESOL learners at Cardiff and the Vale. It's sometimes, I think certainly in FE we do this, or certainly in sport, maybe more than FE, we try to find little pockets of people in different groups where they're based, you know, perhaps in terms of where they live. And actually in FE, a lot of these guys are already in their education provision, and you've got people, and it's not just people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, but that is a very big part of, you know, where we're looking. I think the ILS learners is a good example. You know, there's big hubs for young people with ALN needs and learning difficulties all come together in colleges, and every college has got a department. And Fio mentioned it earlier that she'd had an opportunity to work with some of those guys in college, and you know, it's almost like a missed opportunity. It's happening, but it's almost like a bit of a missed opportunity in terms of, can, you know, ourselves, Welsh Government, Sport Wales, look at that and whichever sort of area of work it fits in best. And I think that would be the second one, you know, is recognising colleges, communities really, so the communities in their own right. Can we support that community for 16 plus?
A question to Emily. You mentioned you were scrolling through the internet trying to find sport. Were you sport mad in school, or did you need a bit of a sort of a helpful kickstart to take up sport between the kind of ages that Rob is talking about?
Before I found the sports that I do now, I didn't actually have any interest in sport at all. Like, because of CrossFit and weightlifting, it's actually pretty much the reason as to why I took up the course that I'm doing in college now. Like, beforehand, I was very much into music and academics and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a big change.
Dawn, we talk a lot about transition from school to college or school to school, because obviously we're equally as supportive of 16 to 19 education in school as we are in college. It's all about the learner choice. How can we work with school colleagues perhaps to make that 14 to 16 is a very busy period, and GCSEs are really much on the agenda. How can we work with, you talk about cross-departmental working, how can we work with school colleagues to make that 14 to 16 sport offering much more perhaps attractive and engaging?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at the moment, and which was in our programme for government, of course, is reviewing the school day and school facilities. And you know, you'll be well aware, Iestyn, that the Welsh Government has ploughed millions and millions into 21st century schools. So we've got fantastic state-of-the-art sports facilities in a lot of our schools now. But they close their gates at 3 o'clock. And, you know, one of the things that we're looking to do is to look at how we can better configure a school day so that, you know, a school becomes an integral part of the community, not just between 9 and 3 o'clock, but right the way through into the evening, so that we can do things with those facilities on site. You know, in my own constituency, we've just had a fantastic facility at Enfawr School down in Rhwng, and they've got like a running pitch and athletics facilities, football, new 3G football pitch, and football and rugby pitches, and so on. And so, you know, I think working with those schools to try to elongate the day and utilise that as a community benefit, I think might help that sort of transition from when kids sort of stop thinking that this is something that they want to do, it becomes an integral part of what the school and the community is doing. I think we've got a lot of work to do, and it's interesting that your 3 learners here say, you know, all young women. But I think we have a big challenge about girls in school dipping out of physical activity. There's the whole stuff around body image, and you know, and doing mixed sports. And do they want to mix with the boys? Would they rather be doing, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and the kit they've got to wear, you know, and all of that sort of stuff. So I think there is an awful lot that can be done that isn't yet being done. But I do think tapping in to what we've got to offer, the facilities that are available to offer in some of our schools, is a good starting point.
Yeah, and we certainly see, I'm sat in a brand new building today, just opened by the Minister of Education, funded in 21st century schools and colleges. Great facilities, great learning facilities, but linking them to those leisure and sort of lifestyle and sporting facilities, and certainly making them available to the community. I think it can sometimes be a real challenge. It's great, isn't it, to say we want to make these facilities available, but you are right, there's things like the length of the school day, how do we manage those facilities, how do we pay for their upkeep, all those things ultimately, I would suggest perhaps, Dawn, are an investment in well-being rather than a cost to be borne. And it's perhaps maybe seeing it the other way around, inverting that sort of position, rather than seen as additional cost, seen as an additional investment in well-being.
Did you read my Fabian article yesterday? Sounds like you did.
I always do my
So I did an article for the Fabians just a couple of years ago when I talked about, you know, whether we should be shifting our emphasis of having a national health service to it becoming a national wellbeing service. Because, you know, what our national health service does, it's not actually a national health service, is it? It's a national illness service. You know, it treats people when they're ill, and you know, this whole emphasis on well-being is about prevention. It's not. It's about, you know, it's about how do we stop people becoming unwell in the first place. And I'm talking physical and mental health now. Because, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, participation in activity, whether it's formal sport or whether it's just general activity, is, you know, we know is a great contributor to mental well-being. And if we can do that more effectively, then we might help to prevent some of the issues around mental health in young people.
I'm going to go to Sarah and Fionn and Emily to wrap up, and then I just literally a minute to say thank you to everybody. Sarah, how important to you is the competitive sport activities as well as alongside the recreational, more well-being focus? You mentioned cricket. We don't have a national cricket team for Wales. It's a different conversation for a different day. How important is being able to compete to you to keep you motivated and aiming to do your best?
Yeah, I think the competitive nature is just as important as just the enjoyment, really. You get personally, I get more out of games when they're competitive. I find it more enjoyable and it's more sociable. I find, like, if you're competing with your team, then you want to win. Most people want to win anyway. So yeah, I find it's really important to have that competitive nature for myself.
And Fionn, as a multi-sport, you know, if it ain't on Strava, it didn't happen, did it? How useful is, for instance, being able to connect with people through digital technology and build a community amongst your friends and family and people perhaps you're not in contact with anymore? Is competition a key aspect of what drives you still in sport and physical activity?
Yeah, I'm a very competitive person. I think anyone that knows me would probably say that. And so the competing aspect really does interest me. I've come to university and they haven't actually got an athletics team in my university, but they're starting it this year. So I've had an email regarding a meeting next week, which I can't wait for. And they link up with the Harriers of the local area in Birmingham. So obviously I'm going to try and get to the competing part. I think the competing part, it's good to have the recreational one, like really good, but the competitive one, it just gives that little bit more for people to aim for. It doesn't just give them one goal. You can have many goals with competing, which I think everyone kind of needs. Everyone needs more goals, further goals to enhance themselves.
Fantastic story there, Dawn, of competitive sport and club activity driving community facilities, keeping them open outside of the hours, obviously, that we would normally see perhaps in school and college. And last word then, before I thank everybody, Emily, what's the next sporting or competitive goal for you? World CrossFit Games, perhaps? First Welsh representation, first Welsh winner?
I mean, maybe. Like I said, I really enjoy the process of just training and the thought that I'm improving. And of course, like, you kind of forget how much you enjoy the competitive environment, especially like during the last year or so after COVID. And not too long ago, I suffered an injury, so I'm just getting back into it. But the buzz of it is incredible. And next, I think I have a UK CrossFit competition the start of November. And then after that, at the end of November, I'm working towards the British weightlifting age groups, which is cool.
So hopefully a very strong message there about the importance of well-being and keeping active, the link between various forms of government and public and private sector funding, but also a reminder, a time reminder when we've all been sort of doing our own thing, that competition can really help support community in all the best possible ways. So hopefully some really strong messages to take away there. Before many of you have to drop off and before I know the Minister has to go, a big word of thank you to Dawn as our Deputy Minister for Sport, Culture, Wellbeing, and generally you've been a good supporter of, I know, a lot of what's going on in the community. So diolch yn fawr iawn I chi fan'na, Dawn. And then to all of you for taking part today. If you found this useful, please tell the Twitter sphere, please tell everybody out there. Please tell your bosses, your line managers, your friends and family. Please find someone to tell today within the next hour or so about all the good stuff that's going on in active wellbeing in FE. And then you too, like these wonderful 3 young ladies and athletes we've seen this morning, you too can be a fantastic ambassador for FE sport and FE wellbeing. Diolch yn fawr chi gyd. Thank you for joining with us. Hope to see you at the webinar sometime soon. Hwyl fawr chi gyd.